Darren, welcome to After Hours, mate. How are you today?
I'm very well, Jimmy. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, man. I'm good. Listen, man, I've been kind of following you for a while. You brought out that I mean, I know you've like I've been delving into your catalog now because the one you brought out about Glasgow and addiction on the BBC, I think it was 2022, but they must
Mm.
have reissued it maybe last year or the year before, and it blew me away, man. So I was really kind of obviously growing up in Glasgow myself. I've not lived there for about 20 odd years now. I'm living in the Isle of Man now, but I spent a lot of time in England, and just seeing that kind of powerful documentary just kind of blew me away in it. And it kind of brought back home like where I grew up, where we grew up. So do you want to kind of maybe start a wee
Yeah,
about where you grew up, how was your childhood, and when you had your first kind of drink?
of course. I grew up in the 80s and 90s in a housing scheme in Glasgow, which was one of the worst for your various kind of deprivation statistics
Right.
and the kind of dearth of opportunity. But also, there was a real culture of resistance and activism and campaigning.
Hmm.
So it was a bit of a dichotomy, because on one hand, a lot of us dealt with the feeling of powerlessness by sort of marinating in the sense of futurelessness
Sure.
or embracing the shame or becoming kind of prideful about how violent our communities were.
Hmm.
And that's often just a sort of coping mechanism when there's not a lot going on. But Pollock also had this, no, we have to make it better, and to make it better, we have to get off our arse and do something about it.
Hmm.
So that was a sort of the framing for me as a kid. On one hand, you've got all the kind of visible tropes of deprivation. On the other hand, you've got a lot of people getting involved in the community at grassroots level. And then as I was sort of maturing out of childhood into adolescence, then I was also dealing with things at home through my mother, who was an alcoholic,
Hmm.
and just the sort of inner and external chaos that comes along with just living with a very serious drinker. So obviously I had a certain level of trauma, attachment wounds, basically all the perfect ingredients to later go on to develop my own sense of discomfort and fear that obviously my first proper drink was going to solve immediately.
Hmm.
And I think that came. I had experimented with alcohol. It never grabbed me. It wasn't until my mother's funeral that was the first drink I really remember enjoying.
And what
And
age were
that
you
was not
then?
just the 16.
16. Right. So still, I mean,
Yeah.
from my experience, well, I was 14. A lot of people on here, it's 14, 15, 16. But sometimes people when they get 16, they go, I was a bit of a late starter. We forget that that is still a child. Do you know what I mean? It's still 16. Well, it's still illegal, let's be honest. And
Yeah.
it is a young age to be getting into alcohol. And so, how was that first drink? I mean, obviously you were using that, and sorry to hear about your mum. Obviously, you're using that as a coping mechanism to just kind of blot out what had happened. And then did it become,
Well, actually, what happened for me was one of the ways that I developed in terms of how I dealt with things was a kind of numbness.
yeah,
So I often, unless it's a wound around a romantic attachment, which I feel very intensely,
hmm,
and I can't push down or avoid. Other kinds of trauma or things like grief and bereavements and stuff like that, it doesn't really hit me at first.
hmm,
There is a sort of it gets triaged and it gets sort of put at a distance. I don't do this consciously. So the thing that happened with me on the day of my mother's funeral was more a kind of a sense that I should feel more than I did.
hmm,
And then what happened was the alcohol didn't just produce the effects associated with drinking. It was the whole context of it. I felt like a man should feel. I was, 16. I was being handed a kind of cold beer by uncles. I was dressed in a suit, black tie. And so it was the whole picture. There was something about it was like that was me. I was formally announced as an adult in that moment. And also it was the kind of being the center, feeling like the center of it all. you
Mm-hmm.
know, because it's your mum who's died. Everyone wants to speak to you. Everyone is concerned for you. And there was just something about having the drink that was like the icing on the cake of that moment. And I think that that whole picture was what really engrossed me at first. It wasn't just the drinking; it
Mm-hmm.
was everything that came with it.
Yeah, the feeling of it, and making that kind of transition from boyhood into manhood. And then, so
Yeah.
how did that kind of develop? Obviously, as I say, a lot of people, it's trauma, or they like the buzz or whatever. But obviously, you've got something different. You've got this feeling of I'm a man, and now that I've got this kind of almost like sword and shield in my hand as the beer. How did that kind
Mm.
of then develop? Did that stick with you then?
What did? I mean, I remember going back to school that day. Excuse me. I
Bless you.
remember going back to excuse me. I remember going back to school that day because I thought I want to go into that high stress environment with
Mhm.
this buzz,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, because school for me sometimes felt like a bit of a gauntlet, you know. I was in some ways very different from a lot of the other boys. I was still interested in the traditional things. I was able to feign interest in them
Mm.
convincingly enough to kind of navigate. But I was into rap music. I was into dressing different. My vocabulary was different. I had red hair, chronic acne. You know, there's just no hiding for me. So I kind of had to, every day in school, sometimes just felt like a fight.
Hmm.
So I liked the idea actually of going to school in my suit, in my jacket, and with a wee buzz in me. There
Hmm.
was something that was weird. It was like the alcohol produced this kind of feeling of let's go in and see how it feels to be in school with this little glow about you,
Yeah.
which is kind of an odd thing to do. It's quite strange. It's quite strange to leave your family and go back to school.
When you've got the
The
day
day
off,
that you get the day off,
you get the day off, but you've
you've just
chosen.
cremated your mother.
Mm.
Yep, and then I don't know what it was. I mean, I guess even just in that, I'm sure a therapist could pick that apart for days.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, and then I left school not long after that. It wasn't really until I was kind of out of the house, and I was drinking becoming a sort of social thing,
Hmm.
and then eventually I was living on my own after a couple of years in a supported accommodation, and that's where I began to kind of obsess about alcohol.
Mm.
I hadn't become an alcoholic, but I had developed that preoccupation with, do I have alcohol in the house in case I want it? Is there going to be alcohol where I'm going? Will I have enough money to buy alcohol? Will the people I'm hanging about with have some? Do I need to get some for them? Are they going to have some for me? Just all that stuff that normal drinkers don't really deal with.
No.
And then, I would say give it another couple of years, the drugs started to kick in. I started experimenting with, everything that was available at that time,
Mhm.
ecstasy, acid, cocaine, and then obviously you get to the kind of benzos and the downers, which for someone like me were a real treat.
Hmm.
That mixing that with alcohol, you start getting yourself into some states. So I'd say I was probably 5 or 6 years of 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 drinking alcoholically, of using drugs in a way that wasn't safe. And then I started realizing I've got to do something about it.
And so what age? I mean, you're saying you went into supported accommodation a couple of years, so would you have been what, about 18, 19 then?
Yeah.
And then how long did the kind of the alcohol before the drugs kind of ramped up, and just being like, what was that kind of time frame before you started thinking, I need to do something about this? So sorry, Darren,
Well,
just first, I think you're about my age. I'm 45. How old are you?
I've just turned 40.
Cool. So you're a bit younger than me. So yeah, so but kind
Yeah.
of the same era growing up around Glasgow,
Yeah,
and
yeah. I mean,
you got
a
the
lot of the
80s, the
guys I hang about,
90s.
yeah, a lot
Yeah.
of the guys that I ended up kind of hanging about with were a
Mhm.
bit older than me anyway.
Right.
Um, so the for me it was, I think one of the catalysts and me following my mother into kind of addiction was that I was on my own very early in life.
Yeah.
When I left home, So when I was in that supported accommodation project, a lot of my needs were being met because there were staff there and they were helping with various things. I had access to mental health support. But this addiction was kind of bubbling under the surface. And because I was kind of from a young age, pretty articulate for my age and regarded by adults as sort of above average intelligence,
Right.
I think sometimes that got mistaken for competence, or it got mistaken for emotional intelligence, where, you know, I was able to sound like someone who knew something about life and knew something about themselves. And in many ways I did, but what I struggled with was seeing where I had to put action in order to actually act on these insights that I had. And what I found, it was a bit too late before people began to twig that I had a problem developing, or before I began to before I even knew. So it was really like, I remember experiencing my first, what I realize now is kind of DTs, you know, like hallucinating, violent shaking, sleep paralysis, just the kind of that mixture of kind of minor withdrawal and exhaustion and malnourishment that kind of manifests in really rough nights.
And
And that was probably
sorry, were you self-medicating then? Did you know that it was the alcohol or whatever else you were taking that you needed to then get yourself feeling better? Yeah.
No. Back then, I was convinced that I had a clinical mental health problem that was undiagnosed.
Right.
And back then, this is before the kind of drug crisis in Scotland began to take shape. So back then, doctors weren't necessarily armed with the information they're armed with now. So you weren't getting questions about how much do you drink or do you use drugs when you were going in and saying, I could hear voices in my head the other night, or I had a hallucination about a little green goblin running towards me in my bed and I couldn't move. Or going into the GP and kind of knowing the sort of dance you've got to do to get the Valium off them. You know, you've just got to kind of give a few keywords. I'm anxious, I can't do anything. The Valium gets prescribed and you run straight to the boozer because you know you've got a few weeks of dodging hangovers, you know, because you can just medicate. But this was just lowering my mood. It was depressing my nervous system. And as the years progressed, what I found was that I was started living in an alternative reality. You know, I kind of adopted this victim mindset, which in the beginning would have been legitimate. You know, I suffered a lot as a child, and then I had a lot of things to deal with as an adolescent. But at some point, I just settled on that as being the whole story, and I became kind of blind to how my behaviour was affecting other people, and very defensive in the face of anyone criticising me or challenging me on stuff. And so basically there you have the kind of the mental emotional condition of an alcoholic, you know. And that's how I lived until I was really about 29, 30. And then the last 10 years of my life I've been, you know, a couple of slips on the way, but I've been more or less sober for the last 10 years.
Wow, that's amazing. And so what did you kind of get to the point and go, right, this is it, I need to do something about it? And then what kind of tools and things did you put in place to get yourself clean and sober?
Well, there were a few different kind of rock bottoms for me. There was a lot of swearing off it and maybe going to meetings or doing a bit of reading on stuff, and then kind of gradually slipping back into it again because I wasn't aware of what it was I was suffering from. I didn't understand that ultimately I had a thinking problem where over years I'd developed a habit of dealing with every problem with alcohol. And so my brain was just in the habit of dealing with anything that was emotionally intense or stressful with a drink. But I didn't understand that then sets up having the drink, and then that then sets up losing control of how much you drink. So I didn't have a defense against having that first drink for a few years. So I would get sober for maybe a month, a couple of months. Then I would go out for one night or have a couple of drinks, and then gradually this would lead back to that place of kind of rock bottom. It would mean relationships breaking down. It would mean sometimes, you know, kind of minor police involvement, all red flags that it's all heading in the wrong direction. And then I think it was 2012, the Christmas of 2012, my relationship broke down. I got sacked from a job that I was working with young offenders because I was turning up and I was under the influence, you
Mm.
know,
Yeah.
or I wasn't in a kind of a emotional condition really to be in that sort of environment. I was just unreliable and flaky,
Hmm.
and so I kind of I sort of dwelled on that and marinated in the self pity over the Christmas New Year, as many of us do, and then it was kind of maybe 2nd, 3rd of January.
Hmm.
I just decided I just experienced a loss of the desire to drink,
Right.
and so I just stopped. I just stopped, and I got into meetings and took it a bit more seriously.
But what is it they say? One's never enough. One's too many, and a thousand's never enough. And so,
Yep.
what was your career like through your twenties until kind of 2012? Then, what were you working as? You
I
mentioned you
was
were working with young offenders and things like that. Was it? Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of I fell into community arts quite young in my late teens through a mentor of mine who was based in Paisley, who was producing for me in hip hop. He produced my first couple of projects, really mentored me and looked after me really when I was kind of wayward,
Yeah.
pointed me towards the local hip hop scene, which became a real point of continuity and quite a
Oh,
crazy
absolutely.
lifestyle.
Yeah.
And then then that led to opportunities of doing freelance work.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Basically just going in working with young people or kids. But I mean, even back then, I mean, I remember one time turning up to do something in Paisley, and I had been up all night. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like, and one of the guys that I was partying with just decided he'll come along with me to the workshop, and, and so I remember being woken up. Uh, I remember being woken up by a youth worker.
Uh-huh.
I had fallen asleep on the table
On the work in the workshop. Yeah. Jeez.
before the workshop's about to start, and then we do the workshop, and then I just leave, and then we go to the pub, and we just continue getting on it. There was no real contact with the reality of things then, but I was so good at connecting with kids and young people that I kept getting work.
Yeah.
Anyway, you know what I
And
mean?
I think
And
that's
you
the
can kind of
thing with freelancing as well. And plus, you're in your twenties. Do you know what I mean? You're going out. You're doing this. I was the same. We could handle it. Do you know what I mean? We could handle the next
yeah,
day. And okay, we're maybe not on 100% our top form, but we're still able to go in and we're hanging, but we're still all right with it. And again, yeah, the thing
yeah,
with freelance work, you can just kind of pick and choose what your hours are. Obviously, you got certain workshops, but do you know what I mean? It's not 9 to 5 in an office where you get the same boss who's cracking down on you every day. So you've got a bit of freedom with that. So
yeah,
it kind of opens up for my in my experience, my life, when I had jobs like that, it was kind of well, especially when I worked in many bars, so it's kind of the same thing. You can just come and go, and it's like, oh, I'll
mm,
phone in sick. So I was habitual phoning in sick. If I was still out on it, it wasn't. I would never phone in
yeah.
sick for a hangover back in the early days. It was just because I was still away with the fairies, doing it, and
Yeah.
continuing to do it. Yeah. So at what point would you say was your kind of darkest moment, and you thought this I've
There
had
was a few ones,
yeah.
I mean, there was kind of a couple of cries for help, which were always sailing maybe a bit close to the wind in terms of some of my attempts subconsciously to tell people that I was really struggling.
Mm-hmm.
Then I had a couple of quite serious accidental overdoses,
Right.
and actually involving over-the-counter medication. I acquired a bit of habit with things like Solpadeine Max and Nurofen Plus and things like that, the stuff that's got the codeine in it.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, I remember one day going into the cupboard to take another four Solpadeine Max and realizing I had done a whole box in a couple of days. So I was already in dangerous paracetamol toxicity levels,
Yeah.
and there's nothing more surreal than being in the hospital, wired up to IVs, having stuff pumped through your system, and honestly not knowing why this has happened. You know what I mean? Just not knowing and understanding the level of addiction that's at play. And that was just in college. I was in college studying journalism at this point. So by that point, I'm off the drink,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm struggling with other things.
Yeah.
Um, so I've not quite got that. I've not quite completely understood it's for me, abstinence from all mood and mind altering substances is what's required.
Hmm.
And I just remember being in the hospital and people coming, no, see, the CPNs coming up, the psychiatric nurses, and everyone's coming over to me really serious. Like, they think with the amount of paracetamol that's in my system, they think that I'm trying to kill myself.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, honestly, like, I was just taking a few of these to go into college because it calmed my nerves. Do you know what I
Uh-huh.
mean?
Uh-huh.
And I've done so much paracetamol that if I hadn't got any hospital, then my liver would probably have shut down. Do you know what I mean? And it's just like,
Yeah.
it's
And you've
it's
done
just
that
madness,
without
really.
you've done that without knowing how many you've taken. Do you know what I mean? You've forgotten that you've
Yeah, you're
taken
just
as
going
many.
four, stick four in, stick another four in, just take four at a time. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
And like, depending on your size and your weight and all that, you might get away with it. Depending on the healthiness of your liver, there's lots of variables. But basically, what I was doing was life threatening, and it was for the most meager amount of codeine. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember talking to a sponsor at the time, and the sponsor was just like, if is there no way you can just get the hydrocodone? Do you know what I mean? His thought was, if I've got this addiction and I'm not ready to stop, what I'm doing is the least safe, least efficient way
Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah.
Do you know
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
mean? So he's
Yeah.
worried about my actual liver packing in, and he's like, if you're gonna do it, try and just get codeine. You don't need the paracetamol.
Hmm.
But for me, it was not just the drug; it was the ritual. You know,
Yeah.
you go to the chemist, you get the thing,
Yeah.
it's in your bag. You go home, you listen to the tablets dissolving in the water, you
Yeah.
drink it, and suddenly, before the drug's even taken effect, all of the discomfort you're experiencing, the minor withdrawal, all of the anxiety, it goes away before the drug's even in your system
Yeah.
because the body knows the drug is coming. And all
Uh-huh.
that, I found all of that just as addictive as the substances was the kind of acquiring the thing, planning the thing, the secrecy of it all. All of
Yeah.
that stuff was part of the addiction for me.
It's absolute madness. When you said that there, I've mentioned it before, but like well, this is when because I'm coming up to 5 years sober and clean in August this year, and
Good on you.
thanks, man. 5 years plus, I was in Hull with my ex-partner, and I would wait until I'd lost jobs, many jobs, and they were all in their last tether with me. It was her and her two kids, and they were kind of minors, so they didn't really know what was going on. But I would wait, and I'd be sat downstairs. There'd be no booze in the house because I'd drank it all my hiding places, and I'd be sat there. And I remember this one morning, hanging, absolutely just rattling away. They're about to go out to school and work. As soon as they've gone, I've bolted up to the shop, well, as quick as I could in that state, got my half bottle of vodka because that was all I was going to have that day. I would have had more, but I got my little square bottle of Glens. Do you know what I mean? And I remember
Mm.
walking out the shop, and I thought, right, and I put it in my jacket, and as soon as it was in my jacket, I felt all right. The rattling kind of stopped because
Yeah,
I knew I was going to be able to drink it. And then I would just wander like a
yeah,
2 minute down the road where it was clear from people, and then I would just start sipping it. But I knew I was coming, so the rattling just totally
yeah,
stopped, and I was kind of
yeah,
back on track, and then I could function. And it's
yeah.
horrible, isn't it?
And I think that shows the power of the mind,
Yeah,
because before you've even introduced the substance your body is craving in order to soothe the withdrawals, before that is even in your body's calming down.
yeah,
Normally, we associate addiction with the substance,
yeah,
and the substance going back into the body. That's what takes away the withdrawal. But I hear time and time again, coke addicts, heroin addicts describing when they decide to acquire the thing and
hmm,
successfully they've scored whatever it is, that they have bodily reactions that show that there is a power of belief in the
hmm,
mind that can override physical withdrawal. And I think that once we get a grip on that the power of the mind, and we start to leverage that in order to deal with the addiction,
yeah,
and we start to leverage that power in order to confront the truth of things, then we really are dealing with a power. We are dealing with a great power that we get access to.
yeah.
Because it's beaten me time and time again. The only time that I've not experienced any obsessive thoughts, any thoughts of using at all. at all for nearly 3 years, which is the longest period that I've been free, not just from drugs, but from tinkering with the idea that I might go back to it in certain circumstances. And while that clarity of thought needs to be maintained through certain things that I do on a weekly basis,
Mm-hmm.
then for me it's a fair deal. It's
Yeah.
a fair deal.
And are you still you're saying that you're thinking of going back to you're not thinking of going back to the drugs, but the thoughts, the intrusive thoughts of that, is that including alcohol as well as that? And just kind of
Yeah,
everything, yeah. And are you still going to the meetings then? Are you still kind of an avid
yeah.
user of
I'm
that?
kind of.
Yeah.
I realised for me that whatever skepticism or reservations I have
Hmm.
about the kind of 12-step fellowships, that when I follow suggestions and when I'm actually just in contact frequently
Yeah.
with other people experiencing this problem, then it connects me to something that helps.
Yeah.
And my life seems to be more stable and seems to improve, and I seem to be able to cope with adversity better when things get tough for me occasionally. When life starts happening,
Yeah.
there's ruptures in relationships, there's stress, there's financial things going on.
Hmm.
Then I've learned to move closer to that community
Yeah.
and really lean on the support that's there.
Yeah.
And it's not just the support of people validating how you feel, but it's also people who challenge you. And I need that. You know what I mean? I need somebody to say, right, okay, what's your part in this, Darren?
Yeah.
What's your part in this? Because
And
that makes me humble.
that was paramount for me. Definitely at the beginning, I went to NA, and it really just, listening to the similarities, what was suggested of me. Now I did my training last year. I'm a trained peer mentor for we've got a charity over here called Motivate, which is it's alcohol, drugs, gambling addiction. So it started off as the alcohol hub, but now it's kind of encompassing all of them. So it's good for me to kind of stay in that community. And obviously with my Instagram and doing what I'm doing on the podcast, this is keeping me grounded, because somebody a while back, right back at the beginning, they said to me, don't let recovery, define who you are. And you know what? The more and
Yeah,
more that sometimes rattles about my head, the more and more I think I do want recovery to define me, because alcohol defined the whole first part of my life, and I'm happy that, recovery is defining the second part. And as
yeah,
you say, it keeps you grounded, doesn't it? It keeps you in that kind of atmosphere and support and
yeah.
just hope.
Me,
Yeah.
it's like, for me, I think that, and this is not a kind of life hack, this is not a cliche. The thing that really helps me is when I'm giving up my time
Hmm.
to help other people, whether that is to support my groups, to keep the doors open for people coming in, whether that's working with other people, taking them through a program, being available to people who need support. This stuff, even though sometimes I can't be arsed or sometimes I think I don't need this, I
Hmm.
recognize that voice that says that as the voice that leads to me picking up the drink.
Yeah.
So the voice that says, no, Darren, you're different from these guys because you're successful. Look at all the things you've achieved.
Hmm.
You're living in a different world now. You're not in that poverty world and all of that sort of stuff. You weren't really traumatized. You dramatized a lot of that stuff. You're actually cool. You're actually fine. Don't worry about all of that. See, when that voice comes in, really that voice is just, it's very patiently building a case that one day it's going to be okay for me to pick up a drink. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, that's how it works. It's like a little barrister in the back of my mind that's just building a case that one day in the right circumstances I'll go, fuck it,
Uh,
let's do this. And so I hear that voice. Sometimes I listen to it for maybe a bit longer than I should,
mm,
but eventually I'll be back at my meeting. I'll be on the phone. I'll be helping out on the helpline. I'll be doing whatever I need to do. And most of the time I'm kind of like, oh man, I could be doing something else.
yeah.
But that's just the mind. You know what I mean? The fact is I'm there. The
Mm,
fact is that I've physically went to do the thing that even if I don't want to do it, which is a mark of gratitude, a mark of humility, and a mark of discipline. And these, for me, are the ingredients of my recovery. And when I'm lacking those things, that's when life starts to feel too hard for me to cope with.
Mm-hmm. There's a guy way back, and he used to every week he'd start his share with, my addiction is just next door in that other room, and it's doing press ups, push ups, chin ups. It's just waiting for me
Mm-hmm.
to show my weakest point, and then it's going to be on me. And that was really powerful for me to listen to that. And he's now. I spoke to him the other day. He's 20 years in May, so he's got some good
Mm-hmm.
time under him. But he's like, I never turn my back on it. I always need to know that it's ready and it can pounce on me when I'm least expecting it. So you said there, you're successful, and Jesus, Darren, you are. Do you know what I mean? You're on BBC Scotland and things like that. So when did that kind of start, kind of making a turnaround in your life and get those opportunities?
My life got better really quickly after I got sober, and to be honest, part of how quickly things improved for me was what disorientated me in recovery,
Yeah.
because it wasn't long after I first got sober. Then I was in college studying to be a journalist. Then I came out of college and I had built a following based on campaigning and activism and political writing around Scottish independence.
Hmm.
And then suddenly, like I was it was a few years down the line, and I realised I had a bit of kind of cultural capital, as they say, and I kind of traded that in to get a opportunity to write a book.
Yeah.
And then I crowdfunded my audience. I asked them, look, if you buy a book in advance, then I'll post a signed copy of the book out to you when it's done.
Hmm.
And this is going to give me a bit of time to work the book, because my
Yeah.
son had just been born, my first kid, and that really afforded me a bit of space to work on the book. In the publication of the book and the reception of the book, Poverty Safari was
Hmm.
really the kind of, I would say, career wise, is the thing that put me on a different kind of plane professionally. So
Yeah.
that's when I became a professional writer. That's when I had more of a national platform. That's when the opportunities flooded in. That's when the material circumstances of my life really did change. While I did find a lot of that very challenging in ways I didn't suspect, and maybe if I could go back, I would do some things differently. At the same time, it was a high risk strategy that I decided to take because I thought that the payoff would be big enough to justify all the shit that came with it.
Yeah.
My boy was born, and I didn't want to, and I knew that if I was going to make something happen, it had to happen then,
Hmm.
because once you start raising a family and you get really into the weeds of just child rearing and all of that, I just knew I wouldn't have the time or energy that
Hmm.
required to make that leap to where I managed to get to. So I was highly motivated, had a lot of support around me, and it kind of paid off, thankfully.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's amazing. And just for the listeners, what is the book about?
Poverty Safari is part memoir, part political social commentary,
Hmm.
which, through a bunch of what seems to be at first kind of unrelated miscellaneous chapters that are just connected by the theme of poverty,
Yeah.
tells the story of how so many people in the UK who grow up in poverty become angry at decision makers in
Yeah.
their community or in their society. So it's the beginning of a theme that I explore in all of my work later. This idea of proximity. You've got to make decisions, and they make decisions based on their misguided assumptions
Hmm.
because they've not experienced a lot of the stuff that they make decisions about. So the drug crisis is a consequence of that. A lot of social policy, welfare reform is a consequence of that. But Poverty Safari is a real kind of street level
Yeah.
book, which also charts my upbringing growing up in poverty and what shaped my experiences and beliefs. And so I didn't have any idea it would go on to do the kind of success that it had. And I'm not talking about selling millions of copies, but the
No,
book
but being
just it kind of
respected. Yeah.
it received a level of wide. It had a wide appeal You
Uh-huh.
know, even though I wear my politics on my sleeve, people know I'm of the left. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Hmm.
Recovery in the process of getting sober, where I realised there's a place for the individual. The individual does have efficacy, and the individual can bring to bear faculties that can help to improve their circumstances, irrespective of how difficult their life has been or how poor they are.
Sure.
And I know that to be true. Then, it means that my politics are slightly more nuanced than maybe the average kind of lefty,
Hmm.
especially the average hard drinking lefty. And I think that because the book has a process of self-reflection, it meant that a lot of people who normally wouldn't read a book by someone on the left kind of
Mm.
heard about it and did read it and were surprised by it. And so it led to the book having like legs for just years and years.
Right.
I mean, I just got another royalty check in yesterday from it, and
Well, it's
this is the book now. I mean, it's nearly 10 years it's been out, so it just shows you that
yeah.
the book's got a life of its own,
Have
and
you
it
done
changed everything for
have
me.
you done an audible version of it? I do read, and I read,
Yeah.
voraciously, so that's going on my list after this. Like I knew you had a book, but I didn't know it was on Audible, so I'll definitely be getting into that.
Well,
And
I've got two. I've got two, but the second one's it's still quite personal, but
mhm.
it's a kind of State of the Union book post COVID. It's basically
All
saying,
right.
here's why Britain's fucked. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a bit more academic. It's a bit more journalistic, whereas the first book has blends together kind of essays
Hmm.
with reportage and personal kind of insights. So it's a
Hmm.
bit different structurally and a bit more accessible, I think, for the average reader.
Cool. And did that then open up the doors to do the documentaries? Were you asked to do that, or was that something you'd always kind of planned to
It did.
get
It
into?
opened up it opened up so many doors I couldn't have taken advantage of the opportunities
Yeah.
if I'd cloned them. There were some things I was offered that I didn't explore, like turning the book into a drama,
Right.
um, because I just I didn't feel sure that it would be done in a way that protected the story and the integrity of the story.
Uh-huh.
And obviously, there would have been other opportunities to write for certain publications or work with certain broadcasters. And at the time, that just didn't wasn't a good fit for me.
Yeah.
But the opportunities that I did get, that I did explore, was to move into broadcasting
Yeah.
and TV presenting and writing and being heavily involved in the creative process of documentary films and learning a lot from collaborators and getting a bit more media savvy in terms of how you go out there and sell something to the public.
Hmm.
So a lot of skills, and a lot of skills to pay a lot of bills, and also a real financial education as well.
Yeah.
Because at first, when you sign your contract, you're just looking at the number on the contract and you think that's all your money, and then you realise, really you're getting less than half once everybody takes their cut.
Uh-huh.
So I had to kind of it was a real boot camp in terms of just how do you manage life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like growing up really quickly, because I'm sure all that happened quite at quite a rapid pace, isn't it? Yeah, from when you got sober to the book to then being on TV. The one, I mean,
Yeah.
the one that I watched, and as I say, I'm going back on the catalog. Darren?
I'm here. I'm here. I'm here.
Yeah,
Sorry, my wife
just the
is trying
video
to
went
phone.
off. It's all
My
right.
wife is trying to. I'm
Ah,
here.
and so yeah, so it was Addictions. I think that's what it's called, the one I watched, and it was about basically, alcohol in Glasgow, and just the way it's shot, the scene when you're in the hospital, you've spoken to the guy, um, and he's obviously he's kind of he's got the belly with the fluid and all that, but then you go in, the
Yeah.
woman doesn't want the cameras in, and you come out and you're just because you can see that she's going to go back out and drink. And I think that's what I got from it. That
Yeah.
she knows they're telling her, listen, you need to stop this. She's already pretty much too far gone, but they're saying, don't go back
Yeah.
out. And it's just that moment where you have to get away from the camera. And I was like,
Yeah.
that could have been any one of us. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like, and people watch that and they go, well, why is she just not stopping? Do you know what I mean? But unless you're actually in it and you know how
Yeah.
hard it is to stop, that's the point in this, and it's like we need to just keep banging this drum and not, you know, it's Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. It's this anonymous thing. We need to break down these stigmas and start getting people out there that, like, it's anyone that's dealing with this problem. It doesn't matter that you're not a homeless person sitting on a park bench with a bottle in a brown paper bag. You know, it's everyone. There's so many.
Yeah.
It doesn't discriminate.
Yeah, it's when you see someone in that state where they're being told one drink could kill you, and
Yeah.
they're still bargaining with the idea of having half a glass of wine at a certain time of day. Or someone who's has had a leg amputated as a result of intravenous drug use, who continues to inject in the other leg that they do have. It's when you're confronted with those cases, people losing their children, people spending lives in the criminal justice system,
Hmm.
and you realise that addiction, while there might have been a choice at some stage, often once we lose the ability to choose, then it's too late, you know. And what we need sometimes is a kind of cataclysmic event or a catastrophe that brings a sort of temporary window of lucidity
Hmm.
into our life where we can see the true gravity of our problem and get the support that we need. Of course, some people, their situation is too grave, for whatever reason, mentally, psychologically, they just can't see, or they don't have people around them that can point them in the right direction.
Hmm.
Some people's rock bottom is going to be death.
Yeah.
And that was certainly the case for my mother and many other people that I know, friends and family. But this idea that the addicts out in the street are choosing to behave like that, that's that's a that's that's such a gross misunderstanding
Yeah.
of the issue that unfortunately still holds a lot of weight in public opinion.
Hmm.
And I can see why people come to that conclusion. In a sense, they're right. There is a choice that does come into play at some stage. But when you're in the grip of addiction, you're not perceiving your true sense of choice.
No.
Your brain has whittled everything down to either you use or you go into withdrawal. And when faced with that choice, there are no other choices.
No, you don't want the sickness. And it's, you know, even going back, the whole alcohol thing, you know, yeah, it's a choice. And a lot of people will look down upon alcoholics or, you know, alcohol use disorder people. And it's like, it can happen to anyone, you know, whether it's a DNA or a predisposition in your makeup, or the fact is you've just done far too much of it. Because let's be honest, it's an addictive drug. So I think a lot of people that are out on a Friday and Saturday night in all the cities across the UK are teetering on the edge of getting dependent on it because they're just doing it to absolute excess, and it's not a case of just having a few glasses of wine here and there, and that's fine. And I know there's people that can do that, but that's not the majority of people. Majority of people are, I think, abusing alcohol at this point. It's like
Yeah,
Hazel's documentary that was on recently, Binge Drinking and Me. Have you seen that one? Um,
no, no.
and it's, you know, I think the level for binge drinking now is two large glasses of wine. So who in the UK is going out on a Friday and Saturday night is not drinking more than that? And that, again, that's, you know,
Yeah,
that's causing liver issues and liver damage. And it's just we grew up in a kind of cultural, social, hedonistic time through the 80s and the 90s and even the noughties. You know, I mean, I don't really know what it's like for the kids out there. I've got some stepkids myself, but they're just below that age of going out and seeing what it's done. I do think the kids are kind of getting a bit more savvy, but for us growing up, what was on TV? You know, it was everywhere. It was just excess. It was, if you wanted to be these idols in a band, or, you know, this, or even, you know, hip hop like you were into, it was all drugs, it was all alcohol, and, you know, fast cars and women. And that's what we've grown up with. So to say we've got a choice,
yeah.
it's almost like majority of people are being pushed into it because it's just what we do, isn't it? You know, as a society.
It is, and also having done a bit of traveling in the last few years, particularly for work, and getting a real insight into how other countries do things.
Mm,
The sort of culture you're talking about is very specific to the UK.
yeah.
There is a feeling, I think, that's justified that the UK population have been offered up as kind of commercial sacrifices to whatever enterprise wants to prey upon their humanity. and their weakness and their vulnerability and their stress, and sell them temporary solutions that are really mounting up as massive public health crises. And then the government in the UK and across the UK really just exists to clean up the mess or manage the mess that's left from handing a blank check to your Smirnoff and your Bacardis and your Coca-Colas and your GlaxoSmithKlines and all of the rest of it. And that's no, I'm coming at this just from a firm grasp of the economics of all of these massive industries, and the fact that if people in the UK stopped and changed their lifestyles today, then the GDP of this country would collapse. You know, it would collapse because either some people would be incapable of continuing with their ordinary work and productivity without the support of these crutches they use, or if they ceased to use them, then it would knock millions and billions off of the value of companies straight away. And so it's kind of baked into our economic model that we are not armed with the facts about how to live healthily. Even people who don't have a physical dependency on alcohol, they'll become very anxious at the idea of going out, night out without the prospect of a drink, and that itself is a kind of dependency. You know, the levels to which we drink. Anyone who's ever been in an A&E on a Saturday night or a Friday night will know. You know, our hospitals, our police, everything is overrun by people who are behaving problematically as a result of being under the influence of alcohol. And you know, government guidelines on how many units you should consume, or government guidelines on how you know what to do if you're under the influence of drugs and all this sort of stuff. It's all window dressing. You know, you need action. You need action. You need to say. You need to take a long strategy of trying to change the culture around drinking, the way maybe we have with smoking. You know, smoking's been banned. There's a stigma that attached to smoking now, and they're phasing it out, where if you're born after a certain date, then you're not going to be able to buy cigarettes. It's banned. And they need to take that approach to alcohol eventually, because it's out of control in the UK.
I mean, I saw, and you know, a lot of these things that I'm learning since getting sober, you know, the fact that it is really bad for you. I didn't really realize how bad it was for you until I stopped and started researching it. You know, 7 different types of cancers. Then I watched your program, and I'm like, the alcohol firms are the big alcohol is regulating itself through advertising. There's no control over that. Like, what is that all about? Like cigarettes, I remember way back in the day, you could still have your Marlboro Man smoking a fag. Then they said we're not allowing people in the cigarettes adverts. So then it was like Silk Cut were really clever with all their kind of arty adverts. Then it was like another 10 years and there was no advertising. Then the cigarette packets had all the warnings on them and all that. And now they're hidden, they're way in the back of the gantries. There's no branding on them. As you say, if you're born after a certain age, a certain year, you're not allowed to even buy them. So it is going that way. I know they're never going to be able to just outlaw, you know, alcohol, because that's, you know, that's taking someone's choice away. And yeah, people are, you know, people have got these fine bouquets of expensive bottles of wine or whiskey and all that, and they've spent millions or thousands on them. So I know I'm not pulling the wool over my eyes. I know it's not going away, but something needs to be done, and we need to start waking people up to the dangers of it, because the majority of them don't know, and it's mental.
Yeah, and I think COVID as well, you really seen a kind of fork in the road where people who didn't drink a lot started to drink even less or stop altogether, whereas the people who did rely on it started to up the amount that they were drinking through COVID, and then that's kind of followed afterwards. So you're seeing an explosion in mental health crisis, you're seeing an explosion in suicide rate, and there's just no way that alcohol doesn't play a role in some of that. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of people, they end up in a place where they feel that there's no point in living anymore because of the havoc that alcohol wreaks on the brain and the mind and the nervous system, and your peaks and troughs and your hangovers and just all of the bullshit that comes with excess drinking. But it's unfortunately, you know, your big your big alcohol lobby's very powerful, like the gambling lobby, and it'll take a long time to get a grip on that, which is why those of us who have found the solution to this particular problem, that's why our work in communities or raising awareness through things like this that you're doing is so important. Because for a lot of people in this time where public services are overrun and where there is no leadership from politicians at this issue, then it really falls to us in the community to be the first responders and to be the people who can rise to that challenge. And what better way to give someone hope than to say, I know what it was like. I remember what it was like to be in your position, and I've managed to turn my life around, and here's how I did it.
Yeah. And that's the difficult part because, I've got a lot of friends that still drink and, a lot of them listen to my podcast and all that. In fact, one said he doesn't want to listen to it because he knows I'll probably persuade him not to drink by listening to the podcast. But
yeah,
so difficult to tell people this is what it's like from this side of the fence. Do you know what I mean? Until you're actually on this side, it's really difficult to say what you're doing is actually you're just poisoning yourself every day. Darren, do you want to tell us a little bit about your trauma industrial complex that you're working on just now?
Yeah, sure. It's a book with a companion live show that will be out in August, published on Penguin, and the show will be at the Edinburgh Fringe. And ultimately, the book is a bit of a departure from the usual subject matter that I tackle. In this book, what I want to focus on, or what I do focus on, is the recent salience of trauma as a concept, as a pop psychology topic. People talk constantly now about the impact of trauma. It frames debates on public health, mental health, addiction, criminal justice. And the average person in the street might even use a lot of the trauma-related terminology to describe aspects of their own behaviour or the behaviour of people in their lives. They might look at things like attachment theory to look at their relationships. And while a lot of people might not realise it, much of the content that they're engaging with online is not always the safest or the wisest stuff to be kind of reframing your life and your experiences around. And one of the more dangerous aspects of that particular online trauma culture is this idea that telling your story publicly is a part of the healing process. And as someone who's talked publicly about traumatic experiences, I've learned that while there is a catharsis and a sense of meaning and you might be able to help people, there are a lot of negative consequences that can come from doing that people are not very well prepared for in a culture where confession is now a marketable product. So the book really uses my experience of becoming a public face of certain issues, a lived experience person, to re-examine some of the fundamental assumptions that public performance of pain is free of risk. Because if you have active trauma, you're not as healed as you think, or you have people in your life who don't want to see the story being told publicly, then that's going to trigger you. That's going to open wounds for you, and that's going to make you more vulnerable than you would have realised. And this culture of talking publicly about things we've been through is much more widespread than people think. And really, the book is examining a lot of that stuff, and it's saying, look, we've all had bad experiences, and everyone's story could possibly help someone. But before we commit it to public property and talk about our lives in the public square, there are some things we might want to do. One of them is the story true? Would it hold up in a court of law? How much of it is a fabrication in order to create continuity in your story of your life? And how much of it actually happened exactly the way you say it happened? What role does victimhood play in how we frame our experiences? Because everyone's a victim and a perpetrator of something. Even those of us who've experienced extreme abuse or neglect, if we understand trauma correctly, we understand that sometimes that wound will manifest as a harm for others around us at some point in life. Those of us who acquire addictions, for example. And how many of us build an identity around these stories of pain, and how true are those identities, or how authentic are those identities really? So it'll be a tough read for some people. It'll
Yeah.
be quite challenging, but I think also hopefully kind of timely and useful in a debate that sometimes has swung too far in the affirm only direction when it comes to how we see our own pain. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the reception will be.
It sounds awesome. I mean, I remember, and you'll probably know this, A Million Little Pieces by James Fry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was, I mean, it was a great book at the time. Someone gave it to me, and they were obviously giving it to me for a reason, but I just read it and went, "Oh, it's a good book." And then all the hullabaloo came out that, he'd fabricated a lot of it and it wasn't true and he shouldn't have done it as a memoir and blah, 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 blah. But, from my point of view at the time, it was a good book. And had I known it was given to me as a kind of guide from what I was going through, I had no idea. It probably
Mhm.
would have helped me. But I think it's like what you're
Mhm.
saying. He was advertising it as a memoir, and the fact that it was a memoir, I was like, oh my God, somebody actually went through all this. And then when I found out afterwards it wasn't actually true, I was like, I wanted to go and find out actually how much of it was true, but we never really
Yeah.
found out on that. So yeah, no, that sounds fascinating, man. And
Yeah.
you're only doing it at the Edinburgh Fringe. You're not coming to the Isle of Man then, no?
Depending on how the book does,
Yeah,
then I will do a tour.
cool.
But that'll probably come in 2026 to support the kind of publication of the paperback.
Absolutely.
Um, but I'll not take it in for granted, but it'll be a busy year for me nonetheless.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'll be about.
Well, it's good to get in before you've gone absolutely crazy busy with all the rest of it. So, yeah, my last
Absolutely.
little bit would be if you could go back to kind of when your drinking and using became a problem in your life, would you
Mm.
take the other path? Do you know what I mean? If you could go back and say, right, which path am I going to go on?
I don't know because the path that I did take is what led me to where I am now. I think if I could change anything, it would be the pain caused to other people.
Yeah.
Because when you're drinking alcoholically, you're living in a delusion, and in order to maintain and reinforce the walls of that delusion, you have to shut out the truth and anyone who tells the truth out it. And this means that people get hurt, hearts get broken,
Yeah.
people get betrayed. Um, I was occasionally, maybe more than I'd like to admit, a bit of a mean person with the
Mhm.
words. I could cut people down very efficiently if I had to. Um, and I still carry a lot of the regret for things that I said or ways that I behaved that were selfish or entitled.
Mhm.
All while thinking myself the good guy and thinking myself the victim.
Yeah.
It's very kind of pernicious how you can move from victim to perpetrator, and not even recognize it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And that's a big theme in the book, funnily enough, as well. So I
Mhm.
would go back and I would go back maybe and I don't know, apply some semblance of self awareness, but at the same time, I've done a lot of repair work on a lot of the things that I
Yeah.
know that I've done wrong. And anything I know about, my door is open. If anyone wants to let me know, I'll be happy to make amends wherever. And that's the best most of us can hope for, to be
Yeah,
honest.
yeah, absolutely. And I'll put all of your Instagram and all the books and the upcoming tour as well on the show notes. But if you were to, so a lot of the people that are listening to, some of them are gray area drinkers, or they might be as bad as you or myself, and they're just trying to start out. What advice would you give to them if they're just kind of starting out
But
there?
look, a lot of them will be wrestling with the idea of, am I an alcoholic? Do
Yeah.
I drink too much? And they'll be preoccupied with how much they drink, or when they drink, or who they drink with, or how they behave when they're drunk, and how they feel when they're hungover. And I think the thing to really simplify it for them is normal temperate drinkers don't have these dilemmas. They
Mm,
don't have that existential dread about the nature of their drinking.
yeah.
They're not in a constant dialogue with themselves about, is this too much? Did I drink too much? A normal drinker is the sort of person who stops once they start to feel that the alcohol is having too much of an effect on them.
Mm,
They just naturally go, okay, I've had enough. So if you're having that debate with yourself, the answer to your question, do I have a problem, is probably yes.
Yeah.
and you need to start from there, and start looking for evidence to support that hypothesis instead of looking for evidence to disprove it. Because all the evidence that you've got a problem's already there. You just need to accept it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good words, good words. And you do a little bit of is it Loki?
Yeah,
Is that your alter
that's
ego?
my hip hop persona.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
that's been my kind of. I took that name on. I guess that's the name I gave to all my character defects. Actually, in hindsight, I took that name on about 17,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
rapped under that name for 20 years, and I just kind of retired that alias last year. Actually, with my
Last
last
year.
album under that name,
Yeah, yeah, but it's
which is
amazing
part
to
of
have all
my
these.
journey of
It's amazing to have all
carry
these
on.
different outlets as well. So, when I saw that, I was like, right, I need to listen to some of this, and it's really good, man. So it's a shame that you've retired it,
Thank
but
you.
it's life gets in the way of certain things as well. And are you
Well,
married?
it's also attachments. It's also attachments, isn't it? It's me. I'm at a point now where the new frontier of my life is letting go of old attachments,
Yeah.
because there are certain aspects of my identity that don't serve me anymore or that aren't authentic.
Hmm.
I'm not a radical. I'm not a political revolutionary. I'm approaching middle age. I have two children. I'm a professional writer with a mainstream audience.
Hmm.
And but these pretensions deep down that I want to appeal and be seen as accepted by people who are like super radical and fuck the government and all of
Hmm.
that sort of stuff. And while I still have a critical mind and an analytical mind, at the same time, I have to be authentic to myself because if I'm living in disharmony, I'm creating conditions. Do you know what I mean, for this illness of addiction to come back in? And so letting go of Loki and moving on was a way of saying, the tools in Loki's box are not the tools I need as a 40-year-old father of two anymore. And I'll take whatever criticism comes with that or whatever judgment comes with that, if any. And that's part of me moving forward in life, I think.
I like it. I like it. But, anything else you want to add to the listeners then?
Oh, not at all, man. Just if you're interested in anything I had to say, you can just catch me on social media or look for my documentaries online or BBC iPlayer.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big rabbit hole once you start getting into it. So have fun if you do descend.
Yeah, will do. Well, thanks very much for your time today, Darren. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, mate. As I say, I've been looking forward to this for a while, and I'm glad you kind of agreed to come on. So thank you, pal.
No worries, my man. Thanks very much.
Take it easy, man. Bye bye. Bye bye.